recall a few things. He said, yeah, that is it. That's the song. That's how the whole thing started.
It's just wild to me to think that while I was enjoying that song as a kid, Newton Farrington was just becoming Uncle Jed. A piece of music can just impact your life in joyful and unexpected ways. That was something I always wanted my son Evan to experience. What roles music played in your life?
Oh, I mean, I played for years, went to like an arts high school where I played bass and that transitioned to upright bass. It was encouraged to explore with new music, and I think that mindset has stayed with me.
My dad played trumpet and I played bass guitar, so I always hoped my kids would want to express themselves creatively with music. Like your mom and I always wanted to make sure that you and your sister were exposed to music and also had opportunities to play music. Is that how you remember it?
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, you guys had me in music lessons all through until late high school.
Now, yearly recitals were part of Evan's music lessons, and one year for the final number, some of the music teachers played a song alongside some of the more advanced students for the recital finale, and we realized that he was going to be part of that group on bass guitar. And they played Hotel California, and it just sounded so good. I was sitting there with tears in my eyes listening to an Eagles song because I realized just how far Evan had advanced as a musician. And later on, we were heading home, and I looked at Evan and I said, Evan, I think you've passed your dad on the bass. And he looked right back at me and he said, I passed you 2 years ago. It just cracked me up because it showed how music had brought him this confidence after playing for so long. How do you think it's connected us?
I mean, I played your bass for a good 15 years, and I mean, there is a poetry to the thumb groove that is right above the pickup of you can see where
National Indigenous Peoples Day, a day to showcase the richness and diversity of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis cultural expressions and stories. Do you have a story you'd like to share? We'd love to hear it. Author and University of Manitoba Indigenous
on top of stories around the globe and connected close to home. It's news you can trust, delivered when you want and where you want on Canada's News app. Now with CBC Radio 1, local and live. Download the CBC News app for free.
You know the feeling of finding a really good podcast? Or the feeling of someone always being there, like your favorite radio show? Stream CBC podcasts, CBC Music, and CBC Radio anytime, anywhere.
This is CBC News. It's 12 o'clock, and we're at 16 degrees with mostly sunny skies over downtown Winnipeg. Good afternoon, I'm Matt Humphrey. CBC News has learned Canada will soon put Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps on its list of terrorist organizations. For years, the federal government has faced pressure from Conservative MPs and families of the victims of Flight PS-752. In 2020, the IRGC shot down the plane in Iranian airspace, killing 175 passengers, including dozens of Canadians. Winnipeg Liberal MP Ben Carr says he supports the designation.
I think it's the right move. I work very closely with members of Canada's Iranian community, of which there is a large number in Winnipeg, and this is something that they've been calling for a long time.
Ottawa had previously argued such a designation could unfairly hurt Iranians in Canada who opposed the regime but were conscripted. Multiple government sources say an official announcement could come as early as this week. One political watcher says he was a bit surprised by the NDP win in Tuxedo, but he can see how it happened. Carla Compton is the MLA-elect for the NDP after yesterday's by-election. She took the seat by slightly more than 600 votes. Christopher Adams is an adjunct professor of political studies at the University of Manitoba. He says since Tuxedo had been the constituency of the past PC premiers, most figured it was a Tory stronghold. PC candidate Lawrence Pinsky says Premier Wab Kinew was being opportunistic by calling a snap election when his party wasn't ready, but Adams says it was the PC's own fault.
The PCs were caught flat-footed, partly of their own making. After all, it was a progressive conservative MLA who stepped down, Heather Stephenson, and it was a difficult timing for the party to suddenly have that as a vacancy.
Adams says the PCs may also not have had good lists of their supporters because it had been considered such a safe seat in the past. The founder of Inner City Youth Alive says the increasing violent crime statistics in Winnipeg mirror what he sees every day. Winnipeg police released a report yesterday showing violent crime is up more than 31% over the past 5 years. And youth crime involving weapons has doubled since 2021. Kent Duick is not surprised.
We've noticed that a lot of kids just carry a weapon. And even the good kids. We had an incident a while back where we took a knife off of a 10-year-old. And when I debriefed it with him, he was in tears saying, I was walking with my sisters. I felt I had to carry a knife. I was trying to protect myself.
Duick says there aren't enough consequences or supports for those repeat young offenders who are responsible for much of the violence. He says drugs, in particular meth, is also fueling a lot of what is happening on the streets. Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet says he intends to get security clearance in order to read the INSICOP report on foreign interference in Canadian politics, but he's in no rush.
They sent me a lot of paper to fill. I have not completed it yet. I'm not in a hurry. All I want is to make sure before the election that there is no member of parliament in my caucus which would have been involved in any way with a foreign power. And that's it.
Blanchet says when he does read the unredacted report, he will not comment on its contents in order to protect Canada's ability to collect intelligence. Canada's population has topped 41 million. Statistics Canada says that milestone was passed in the first quarter of this year when almost 120,000 immigrants and almost 132,000 non-permanent residents arrived to the country. And the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce wants to lower the minimum working age. It's part of the Chamber's asks of the provincial government ahead of this fall's election. Alexander Kwan reports.
The Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce has a suggestion for dealing with labor shortages in the province. Lower the minimum age of those allowed to work from 14 years old to 13. While some teenagers might already be seeing dollar signs in their eyes, it's an idea that's received harsh feedback. Lori Jobe is the president of the Saskatchewan Federation of Labor.
I think that for a lot of people, they're working 2 or 3 jobs just to maintain, to be able to pay their bills and to, afford their families and to do all the things. Making sure that people are going to work younger is not going to help that at all.
The Chamber of Commerce has not explained why it came up with the recommendation. Sean Tucker is a professor of occupational health at the University of Regina. He says there's a reason we restrict children from entering the workforce.
When you get to young people, especially, the power differential between themselves and their supervisor and employer is incredible.
The proposal is not on track to be a law, but it's something that could come up during this fall's provincial election. Alexander Kwan, CBC News, Regina.
And finally, 2 people calling themselves climate protesters sprayed Stonehenge with orange paint. Bystanders intervened and tried to stop them damaging the ancient monument further. Police say 2 people have been arrested. Video of the incident was released by an activist group called Just Stop Oil, and it all happened one day before thousands are expected to attend a summer solstice ceremony at Stonehenge. In Winnipeg, sunny and pleasant, a high of 21 today. Brandon, a mix of sun and cloud, and a high of 20. Dauphin, a chance of showers and sunny with a high of 20. Right now, you're listening to CBC.
Good afternoon, Manitoba. You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM, 990 AM, and everywhere on YouTube. I'm Corey Funk, in for Janet Stewart. Happy last day of spring. Well, coming up this hour on the show, Manitoba Health says cases of a rare and sometimes fatal bacterial infection are on the rise in our province. Well, coming up, our call-in conversation this afternoon, an epidemiologist will be with us to answer your questions about how to make sure you're protected. That's after 12:30. But this half hour on the show at 12:15, we're going to hear about a book and bake sale in Winnipeg this weekend that spreads education, connection, and hope to incarcerated people around the province. But first up, Radio Noon begins with the story of a northern Manitoba pet rescue that needs help. Northern Manitoba Paws in Need is the name of a pet rescue. It's based in Thompson and shelters animals rescued from smaller northern communities. But the space the shelter has rented for more than a decade has been sold. Vicky McNevin, the person who founded Northern Manitoba Paws in Need, she says she has found a new space for the shelter, but her worries aren't over. Janet Stewart spoke with her yesterday and began by asking how a big deal it is for the shelter to have to move.
It's pretty big, pretty huge, I think. Like, we have a full building of animals, and we have to keep in mind their needs as we're trying to move to another space. We can't just take them. They don't all get along with each other, so you can't take them all and put them into one spot. So we need to move kennel runs and go over to whatever new space we get, build a kennel run, move a dog, take one apart, build a kennel run, move the next dog, take one apart, build a kennel run, move the next one, right? And there's, we have plumbing that we have to use because we do grooming on the dogs and on the rescue dogs, and we do grooming on other dogs to bring in a little bit of money for the rescues to, so we can feed and vet everyone. So we're going to have to remove our tubs and reinstall them, and it's a lot of tearing apart and rebuilding.
Take me back to the moment you found out that building was being sold.
We were told it was going up for sale, so I was kind of like, okay. Oh, what do I do now? But as any building in Thompson, lots of the buildings none of them seemed to be going that fast, so we weren't in much of a big panic. But it sold actually quite fast. So I was a little shocked that it was sold quite fast, but I didn't feel like I was in too much of a panic at first until they literally came May 27th. The guy next door came over and he said, I just want to tell you that we are officially sold and we have to move by August 1st. And I was like, oh, okay. So then obviously I'm in a panic trying to find a place. I've gone to see several places and It's a lot of places, well, we don't want dogs, but it's been a bit stressful trying to find a place to move to and that is willing to accommodate and help us out and get us in there as fast as they can. We did get a place. We talked to a company here, A&B Builders and Murray Bennett, who owns a couple buildings in the industrial area, and we're going to be leasing from him. But we can't get in there. There's another company in the building. We can't get in really to do anything until July 1st. So then that leaves us only 1 month to do all this tearing down and rebuilding and packing up and moving. And we had already set up, before we heard the building was being sold, to do a spay and neuter clinic in our building. So I can't really tear anything apart because that's happening next week. We're having a week-long spay and neuter clinic to make sure any of the rescue animals get done first. And then the vet that's coming in is also offering some low-cost surgeries to some people in town, so which is amazing. So it wasn't like we couldn't cancel it. We already had this booked and arranged, and people's surgery dates and whatnot set up. So
and it's a big deal.
We can't even start tearing down. That's a huge deal to bring in. We have animals coming in from Split Lake, from Gillam, from Snow Lake, the Paw, or Flin Flon, that have already dates booked, and we have this transport set up for a few animals to come in from South Indian Lake and whatnot, and it's you can't really cancel all that on them. We want these animals to have their spay and neuters done so that it helps to reduce the amount of unwanted animals out there, right?
So Vicki, what do you need to make this renovation first and then move happen so quickly at the end of July?
We need a lot of helpers to help pack some boxes and take apart fencing and kennel runs and help us rebuild. And we don't have $30,000 sitting in the bank to hire people to come and do this for us, right? So anybody that has some hands and some free time that's up for helping us with it, we are more than happy for them to come and help.
Vicki McNevin, thanks for your time today.
Not a problem.
That's Vicki McNevin speaking with Janet Stewart. She's the founder of the animal rescue Northern Manitoba Paws in Need. Well, 12:12 right now. Got time for a little bit of music. Winnipeg band Indian City celebrates their album release this Friday at Blue Note Park here in downtown Winnipeg. Have a listen. This is their latest single. It's Strawberries and Champagne.
Buy me a cup of coffee and I'll be your best friend. And if you scratch my back, well, you get everything. Sooner or later, things will just right themselves, you see. Rather than backseat driving, won't you ride up front with me? I say, hey, seasons need to change. If you're waiting for rainbows first, you have to put up with the rain. I say, sweet pleasure and sweet pain, your hand in mine, side by side, strawberries and champagne. Life is complicated business, we do what we can. Follow the road laid out by all our moms and dads, and the highs and lows, and the sticks and stones in our castles of steel and glass. nothing lasts forever, baby. All this too shall pass. I say, hey, seasons need to change. If you want a rainbow first, you have to put up with the rain. I said, oh, sweet pleasure and sweet pain. Your hand in mine, side by side, strawberries and champagne. Raise a glass 'cause we made it through. So here's to me and you. Seasons need to change. If you want a rainbow first, you have to put up with the rain. I said, oh, 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 sweet pleasure and sweet pain. Your hand in mine, side by side, strawberries and champagne. Your hand in mine, side by side, strawberries and champagne.
That's Indian City with Strawberries and Champagne.
Massey Hall, the most iconic music venue in Canada. An absolute milestone in the careers of musicians who stand on the historic stage. And you have a front row seat. The Beaches, Charlotte Cardin, William Prince, Jeremy Dutcher, July Talk, and more. CBC Music Live at Massey Hall, now available on CBC Jam.
Thank you, Toronto!
You're listening to Radio Noon here on CBC Radio 1. I'm Corey Funk in for Janet Stewart. Well, still to come just ahead here on the show, how can a book and bake sale really make a difference when the funds connect isolated people with their family, friends, and culture? That's how. But first here on the show, let's take a look at your current conditions across the province right now. It is the last day of spring, and it's still kind of spring-like weather out there. A little mild, but a lovely day overall right across the province. Brandon, right now, you're at 16 degrees, mainly sunny. Churchill, up at the airport, you are at 8 degrees right now, mostly cloudy. Dauphin, mainly sunny right now, 16. Flin Flon to the airport, mostly cloudy, 13 right now. Gillam, you're getting a little light rain, and 9 for you right now. Lynn Lake, also some rain for you, 10 degrees right now. Norway House at the airport, mostly cloudy, and 13. To Dooley Lake, you are our cold spot in the province right now. You're sitting at 6 degrees. Also in Thompson, 11 right now, so it's a light rain shower for you. And Winnipeg at the Forks, the hot spot today, we're sitting at 17, heading for a high today of 20. Well, attention lovers of books and baked goods. You have a chance this weekend to indulge those two passions while also doing some good. 2 community organizations are joining forces to host a book and bake sale fundraiser. They'll then split the proceeds to help incarcerated Manitobans maintain a sense of connection to the outside world. Kristen Werman is past chair and founder of the Manitoba Library Association's Prison Libraries Committees. Thanks for joining us by Zoom today, Kirsten, sorry.
Thanks for having me. Sorry if it's a bit loud here.
All good, all good. It's kind of funny coming from a librarian as well.
We're louder than you think.
Yeah, what the heck? Also in studio, we're also joined by Rowan Moyes there with me in studio. Hello there.
Hi there.
Rowan is a volunteer with Bar None Prison Rideshare Program. Good to have you both with us this afternoon. So Rowan, just want to start with you. Tell us a bit about the rideshare program. How does it work?
So we started the rideshare in 2015. We knew that there was a need for people to have transportation to visit their loved ones who are in prisons in Manitoba. Most of them are not located in the city, and there is no buses, or you can take a very expensive cab ride to get out to the closer ones, but it's hard to get out there, especially if you're on a limited income. So we started a rideshare where volunteer drivers pick up the passengers and drop them off for their visit. And all of the people involved in the project are volunteers, but we do reimburse drivers for their mileage.
And what prompted you to get involved with it?
I was one of the people that started Bar None. We're a local prison abolitionist solidarity group. So it's just something that's very important to me. And many of us either had incarcerated loved ones or worked with people who were or had been incarcerated and just knew that this was a gap that needed some filling. We unfortunately as a small all-volunteer group, we cannot offer everybody rides that asks for one. But I just looked this morning. I think over the last year we had about 400 requests for rides. So
wow,
there's there's a good need for it even this many years later, and we're also always looking for volunteer drivers.
So 400 requests, and how many are you able to meet of that? Like how many people do you have to turn down?
It depends. I think we did about 2/3 of those, so that's still about 300 rides, and around one. Sometimes things come up and people cancel their visits, and sometimes we can't find a driver. So, people's lives are busy, but we do what we can, and yeah.
Wow. Kirsten, I want to turn to you now. You're a librarian. You've worked with the Winnipeg Public Library for years. What need prompted you to found the Prison Libraries Committee?
Well, I was working with a similar committee in Edmonton, and then I moved to Winnipeg and found that there was just the exact same need here. Perhaps most people don't realize that provincial prisons in Manitoba, most of them do not have what we would consider a library. So don't think about Shawshank Redemption or Orange is the New Black. Like they have perhaps a shelf of books in a unit or just nothing at all. And that's because there's no mandated legislation that prisons should have a library. So there's a huge, huge need. And as a librarian, I mean, social justice is a really it's super important part of what I do and how I move through this world. And we work so hard to break down barriers to access to information. And that includes for community members who happen to be incarcerated. So we started off at the Remand Center back in 2012, and now we are in some way in every single provincial institution in the province. So that's 6 adult institutions. And we are also starting programming and a pop-up library at the Manitoba Youth Center, because even the Youth Center does not have an actual library space. So meanwhile, prison library service is actually a minimum human rights requirement as mandated by the UN Mandela rules. So this is a really, really important. We've got 13,000 incarcerated community members, and at the very least, they need to have access to information.
Is that a common thing, like across the country, or is Manitoba an outlier when it comes to offering libraries or not offering libraries?
No. Almost all provinces and territories do not have that directive to provide a library, so that it's nothing really new. There are lots and lots of public libraries that are working hard across the country trying to get books into prisons, as well as volunteer organizations. I should say that as well. Just like Rowan and Bar None, we are completely volunteers doing this work. So it's a bit sad. We have to rely on a bake sale, book and bake sale, to fund the work that we do that is really needed, as evidenced by Rowan explaining how many rides are needed, and certainly the 13,000 incarcerated folks that need access to information as well.
And Chris, what have you noticed about the difference these books make when you bring them to prisons?
Well, it can be pretty profound. I'm also doing a special project on legal information because there's a real lack of legal information in prisons. And so, we get asked for, how does the legal system work? Something basic like that. Or they're asking, what about immigration law? I need information about immigration law. I mean, that's huge. But also, just reading, is really good for your mental health. Reading fiction is great for your mental health, and certainly we know that our whole society is fraught with mental health issues these days, and that is the same for those who are incarcerated. But also, just the hugest thing I think is because of this ongoing colonial history and the systemic racism that exists within both the library and the prison institutions, we really have to consider Indigenous ways of knowing. And so we are working very, very hard to bring in Indigenous books. And so we've started, actually after last year's book sale, we were approached by the loved ones of Joe Big George, who was an elder in Manitoba prisons and worked with incarcerated people. And he really believed in the power of reading from your own culture, and art and history. And so we have begun the Joe Big George Memorial Collection. Again, we have no funding for it, except from the huge generosity of our community. But we are trying to get collections of Indigenous materials into every single prison in the province. We delivered our very first collection of 200 books to Milner Ridge, which is where Joe Big George was an elder. And we are working on getting more throughout the province as well. That is huge.
It sounds like a monumental effort. Wow. And Rowan, before we kind of talk more about this fundraiser, I mean, you must spend a lot of time with folks on that potentially very long drive out to the prisons. What do you have any stories that stand out to you in terms of what you've heard from family members?
People are really just doing their best to stay connected, and it's a struggle, especially with like Milner, where it's a bit farther away. Using the phone systems in the provincial prisons and jails is very expensive as well. But it's really not. They're just like everyone else. So it's nice to just have a ride with somebody. You chat, you turn on the radio, and it's like any other human interaction that you'd have with folks. So.
And Rowan, before we let you both go here, tell us a little bit about this, the book drive and the big sale.
Yeah, so the book drive has concluded. We usually do that in May, but some of the books that we do collect go towards the Prison Libraries Committee as well. And then the rest we sort by title and weed out anything that we feel like is not worth putting into the sale. And then on this Saturday between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. at the West End Commons, we will be selling books and baked goods. And there'll be coffee as well. Everything is pay what you want. This is so that it's as accessible as possible for everybody in the community to come down and grab a few things that might interest them. And we just trust that people will donate according to what they think is fair and what's within their means, but we really don't police that. The only thing we ask is that if booksellers are coming to buy books for resale, that they come at 2 p.m. and then we have a flat rate for boxes for that. But yeah, it's just a really nice day. People are really thrilled. It's all ages. People can bring their kids. Bring a reusable bag. We are asking people to wear a mask indoors just to keep it as accessible for community members with compromised immune systems as well. So we'll have some at the door, but you're encouraged to bring your own. And we hope that we'll see people out there on Saturday.
Well, Rowan, Kirsten, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That is Kirsten Werman is past chair and founder of the Manitoba Library Association's Prison Libraries Committee, and Rowan Moyes volunteers with the Bar None Prison Rideshare program. Well, 1 minute left until your news, and still to come, we do have a conversation coming up with an epidemiologist, because Manitoba Health says cases of a rare and sometimes fatal bacterial infection are on the rise here in Manitoba. It's called meningococcal disease. We're going to talk more about that and how to protect yourself. That's coming up right here on Radio Noon. It is also the last day of spring, and spring-like weather here in Manitoba right now, but it is going to warm up, to about 20 degrees today. 21 degrees today is the forecast high. Then heading tomorrow, though, for the first day of summer, more summer-like weather, to 26. We're going to get more of an in-depth look at your forecast from Riley Lachuk after your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. At 12:30, we're at 17 degrees with mostly sunny skies over downtown Winnipeg. Good afternoon. I'm Matt Humphrey. The federal government is preparing to list Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization under Canada's criminal code. For years, the federal government has faced pressure to do so, both from Conservative MPs and families of the victims of Flight PS 752, which the IRGC shot down. Winnipeg Liberal MP Ben Carr says he supports the move. A political scientist from the University of Manitoba says the NDP win in a PC stronghold is a bit of a surprise, but there are a number of reasons for the PC loss. Christopher Adams is an adjunct professor of political studies at the U of M. He says the party may have been caught off guard by the election call, but it was necessary because of Heather Stephenson's abrupt departure. And Adams says the party may have also taken that seat for granted.
There hadn't been a lot of door knocking over the past few elections in Tuxedo because it was considered a very safe riding. So the party has not had the lists and the ability to identify all their voters.
Adams also says the new Democratic government under Wab Kinew is still in its honeymoon phase, which could also be a factor. And the founder of a group working with inner city kids says he sees the human face of the statistics released by police. Yesterday, a police report showed violent crime has gone up by 31% over 5 years, and youth crime has doubled since 2021. Kent Duick with Inner City Youth Alive says he's seeing more and more children arming themselves for protection. He says he disagrees with recent police statements saying they, quote, can't arrest themselves out of the problem, end quote.
I would push back and say, I think we can arrest our way out of about 80% of it. Because, I mean, just look at that data. Those 117 youth, they need to be contained and cared for. And I'm not I'm not talking lock them up and throw away the key. I'm talking we need to also take a look at our prison system.
Duick says the young people say they have few programs to help them while incarcerated and few supports when they get out of incarceration. He also says drugs, especially methamphetamine, are fueling a lot of the violence on the streets. And that's your CBC News from Winnipeg. Drooling instead of fueling. Pardon me. Corey.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Sorry, we were a calling conversation coming up.
Yeah.
We're getting it's already getting lots of planning. Sorry there, Matt.
People don't see all the work that goes on behind the this call segment.
There is a lot that goes
There's
in.
a lot that goes into it. That was one of my first jobs.
Yeah, it's busy. I know, and so thank you so much, Matt, for covering with extra news.
Oh, happy to help.
That is Matt Humphrey at our CBC News desk, and Riley Lachuk is also here in the studio. Always lots of moving parts here on Radio Noon to tell us a little bit about what to expect in quite a lovely forecast.
Let's talk about the summer solstice. Tomorrow, 3:50 p.m. is when summer officially starts. So put that into your calendar.
I will celebrate right at 3:50. Woohoo!
So summer solstice, here is what it means. Of course, the winter solstice is when we have the shortest day of the year. The summer solstice, the exact opposite of that, being the longest day of the year. And of course, we have the equinoxes in both spring and fall, which are equal parts day and night. So tomorrow, 3:50 p.m., the sun is at its highest point in the sky, giving us 16 hours and 21 minutes of daylight tomorrow.
All right.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
5:19 is our sunrise tomorrow, setting at about 9:41 officially, but you'll still see some of sort of that dusk hanging around till about 10:30, 11 o'clock in the evening. So a very long day tomorrow.
I always forget how we're not that shy of a midnight sun. We're not that far off here.
We're not that far off, considering places south of us getting about 15, 14 hours of daylight tomorrow. We're in that lucky range there, 16, almost 16 and a half hours tomorrow. Forecast, all important forecast, of course, 26 degrees tomorrow, a mainly sunny sky, above seasonal for this time of the year. So certainly feeling a lot more summer-like as we enter a bit more of a drier pattern here across the province, and a little less in the way of moisture. I think a lot of people, what I've been hearing from a lot of people anyways, gee, enough rain already. Which is fairly accurate, I think, for what a lot of people are thinking. 16 degrees in Winnipeg and Steinbach right now. Brandon, Melita, Morden also at 16. It's 11 in Thompson, 8 in Churchill at the moment. A few scattered showers across northern Manitoba. Otherwise, we're looking at a mix of sun and clouds across the north, mainly sunny skies in the south. Risk, though, we could see maybe a couple rumbles of thunder in extreme western Manitoba, sort of through the Parkland region, the Duck, the Riding Mountains. Could see a couple of rumbles of thunder throughout the afternoon hours. Best chance, though, comes as we get into Thursday. Thursday's mainly sunny for most of us in Manitoba, a few clouds hanging around, but as we get into the late afternoon on Thursday, we do see the potential there, at least, or the ingredients there for maybe a rumble of thunder through the late afternoon, early evening. Again, the best chance for that coming through the Westman region and into the Parkland region, but can't rule out maybe a couple rumbles of thunder here in the Red River Valley as well as we get through Thursday. Northern Manitoba under the sunshine as well through Thursday and into Friday. We're looking at sunny skies, and that's kind of what we get as we get through the weekend. I was talking about thunderstorm potential and looking at the Cape forecast, the storm energy forecast, sort of looking at the ingredients for thunderstorms. And yes, does also conclude that we have the best chance for that through the late afternoon, early evening tomorrow through the Westman region. So we'll keep our eyes on the skies for that. 21s across most of southern Manitoba today. Sunny skies, 22 in Morden, Winkler, Emerson, and 14 degrees in Thompson. Some sunny breaks of the afternoon. Otherwise, the potential there for a few scattered showers. 26 tomorrow, 27 for Friday in Winnipeg. Chance of a shower through the later part of Saturday once again. And we have a sunny Sunday at 26.
Thank you very much, Riley.
No problem.
That is Riley Lachuk, our weather and climate change reporter. Well, it is that time of the show where we ask you to call in with your questions, your stories. And today we are talking about meningococcal disease. As we've been reporting in the news, Manitoba health officials say cases of a rare and sometimes fatal bacterial infection are on the rise. Since last December, there have been 19 cases of invasive meningococcal disease, when typically they see around 6 in a year. And of those 19 cases, all but one are the W strain. That's the strain that causes meningitis, and that can lead to severe brain and spinal cord inflammation. So how serious is this uptick in cases? And when it comes to vaccines, the same questions often come up. Who should get them, when, where, how often? So to answer all of your questions about meningococcal disease and how to be protected, we have reached Dr. Christopher Labos on the line. He's an epidemiologist and cardiologist in Montreal. And we're also opening up the line for you to ask any questions you might have, or maybe share stories or experiences maybe you've had with meningococcal disease or meningitis. You can call us during the show. Lines are open now. Wendy's standing by to take your calls. 204-780-0893. That's 204-780-0893. Dr. Labos, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So I first want to start by putting this number in to perspective. See, people here, normally they're 6 in a year. Now it's jumped to 19. There's over 1 million people in the province. It's easy to maybe think, hey, that's still a low number. But how serious is, this uptick?
Well, I think it's important because you are right. It is a relatively small number when you consider the size of the population. And yet, yet you don't want people to die of preventable diseases. And meningitis, bacterial meningitis, is a preventable disease because we have a vaccine to help protect against it. And if you were to get infected, a treatment with IV antibiotics would in fact be curative. So I think it's important to talk about risks, even low risks, if they are easily preventable and when the costs are very, very severe. Because the reason why we're talking about this is that people die of meningitis, and these are preventable deaths, often preventable deaths of otherwise young, healthy individuals. And so I think, as a result of the pandemic, obviously people are like, well, unless 1 million people are dying, this isn't a true emergency. Clearly, the scope of this problem is less than what we had with COVID-19, and yet it is still an important issue because it's a time to remind people about some of the important principles of public health, which is make sure your kids are caught up on all their regular vaccinations. And the reality is that a lot of vaccinations did fall by the wayside during the pandemic because of the disruptions to the healthcare service, because of the fact that it was hard to get appointments. A lot of people don't have a family doctor now. So these episodes are opportunities to remind people, hey, make sure you check in, go to the vaccine centers, make your appointments, make sure your kids are all caught up, because there is a reason why we don't see as much meningitis in North America compared to other parts of the world, and that is because we have a pretty good vaccination program in place.
Here in Manitoba, so there's these 19 cases. What are we seeing across the country right now? How does it compare?
I don't think there's a clear trend quite yet. At least I haven't seen anything to suggest that there's a clear trend. So whenever you have an uptick like this, you never know if it's just statistical variation or if it's the beginning of something significant. And that is sort of one of the challenges of public health, because everything you do before an emergency seems like an overreaction, and everything you do after an emergency seems like you didn't go far enough. Mm-hmm. So is this significant? It's very hard to say. And yet a robust public health response is how emergencies stay small. Let's, again, if I can just go a little bit off topic here, think of the Mpox outbreak that we had a few years back. It was relatively contained, all things considered, but that's because public health officials responded promptly at the time, had a good vaccine rollout for the high-risk communities that were being affected, and were able to contain it. And so this is the great tragedy of public health. When it works well and you prevent a disease, everybody points at you and says, well, you overreacted. Like, why did you overreact if there was just 19 cases? So you're almost victims of your own success in this way.
Right. And just to give us kind of a reminder, like, what is invasive meningococcal disease? And maybe how's it different from meningitis? I think people kind of get it kind of mixed up a little bit too, right? Or are they the same, different?
Yeah, so meningitis, what the word meningitis means, anytime you see the word itis at the end of a word, it means inflammation. It actually means infection. So if you have an appendicitis, it's an inflammation of your appendix. If it's bronchitis, you have inflammation of your bronchi, of your respiratory tract. So the meninges are the tissues surrounding your brain. So meningitis is an infection/inflammation of the tissues around your brain. Anytime a bacteria infects your body, it can, in theory, infect anywhere in your body. Some of the names that we've given to bacteria reflect where they were first discovered and what diseases they're most likely to cause. So Streptococcus pneumonia, unsurprisingly, very commonly causes pneumonia. And Neisseria meningitidis, I can never pronounce it correctly, but the Neisseria bacteria, most commonly causes a meningitis, a severe infection of your central nervous system. And that's why we are talking, because as you can imagine, if an infection of your central nervous system goes untreated, you will eventually lapse into a coma and die. And when you hear these bad outbreaks, we haven't had a very bad outbreak in Canada since, I think, the mid-1990s. But that's when you start hearing reports of young children dying. And that's why we take this very seriously, because we do not want young children to die. And we have as a society quite correctly decided that the death of even one child from a preventable disease is something to be avoided. And so that's why we talk about it as much as we do.
Well, we are still having, we do still have the lines open. You can call us 204-780-0893. That's 204-780-0893. And while Wendy stands by to take your calls, we actually have a story from someone right here in the building, Travis Peterson, who's normally behind the scenes, keeping our YouTube, making us look good on YouTube, also has a very personal story about meningitis. Hi there, Travis.
Hey, Corey. Thanks for allowing me into this room.
Yeah, thanks for stepping from behind the glass. Tell us a little bit about your story, your experience with meningitis.
Yeah, well, we just got talking while we were having our show meeting and everything, and I just got telling you my story, and I think that was kind of what came out of the conversation, just how kind of rare it is to find someone who's been through like something with meningitis. So what happened? And hey, Dr. Laubos, a big fan here, by the way. What happened is in December, about 7 years ago, we had our son Maddox, and we had 3 boys together, me and my wife, and it's the first time she got an epidural. And in January, a couple of weeks after we had Maddox, I was on pat leave. I took 4 months off to be at home with my wife. And in January, she started getting these crazy fevers, and she started just tired all the time and really, really, really sick. So we brought her to our doctor, and it was, she was breastfeeding at the time too. I should say that because I think her being pregnant made it hard to diagnose what eventually was meningitis, where my story is going. So at first, we brought my wife into the doctor, our regular doctor, and she said, it's probably some, I think it was a hormone thing or something, bladder, something, it's something in the breastfeeding process. The bladder was getting stuck, or there was something in there. So they tried something or other. About another month went by, and I'm talking every day, not just every couple of days, she would have a fever, hard to get out of bed, and I would manage with my boy. And here's February, March, April. I'm back to work now because it's 4 months, and pretty much that whole time I was off, she was like bedridden, and so we kept trying to go back to our doctor, and a diagnosis went anywhere from hormones to this breastfeeding thing. She had to quit breastfeeding about a month in, where our other boy, she breastfed, for about a year and a half or whatever it was. So she had to stop breastfeeding. And then time went on. I went back to work. She still wasn't great. I kept bringing her to the ER, the St. B ER, the Grace Hospital ER, just out of frustration, just with what's going on with this. And they all diagnosed her something different. We went to a clinic and they said, she probably has postpartum and it might be depression. They gave her lorazepams or something like this. And then finally in July, it was hot as heck. That's how I remember. She had a day where she was just boiling, her fever was crazy. And we took her to a clinic. I won't name it, but we were in this walk-in clinic because we were just so frustrated. So I was trying to see if somebody had some answers. And we were in this walk-in clinic, and she was literally screaming in the lounge that she was hurt and her brain hurt. And they were like, it must be this postpartum thing. They were on postpartum for a bit. And so anyway... One time when we were at St. B, we went to St. B Hospital to the emergency. A male nurse came up to us, and I'd love to find this fellow. He said, "This sure sounds like meningitis." And I had somebody in my life who had gone through it, and they said, "This sure sounds like meningitis." So I bring it up to my doctor, bring it up to every doctor we've seen, and they're like, "That's crazy." And I had one doctor literally say, it can't be meningitis because she'd be dead by now. It's 8 months long. So finally, we bring her to St. B by ambulance because she was just having I thought she was going to die. And we bring her to St. B, and sure enough, after a ton of tests and sitting in the ER, it turns out to be meningitis. So we're very far along at this point, and all of a sudden they said, we have to do a lumbar punch. Is that the one on the spine, doctor? They have to,
exactly.
They have to test her spinal fluid. But they said, as a spouse, I had to sign a form because she was so far gone that if they do a lumbar punch, that to test the fluid, all the fluid in her brain could sink into the back of her head, and that's the part of the brain that does the walking, talking, and breathing. So I look at this doctor, the neurologist, and I go, "Oh, so she'll die?" And they're like, "Yeah, there's a possibility." So finally, after all that, they diagnosed her with meningitis, and it was August by this point. And she was in the hospital for 10 days because doctor will know this better, the cultures and everything, just for the testing. So That's just my story. So I just wanted to put it out there because when we were going through this, it was hard to find somebody because it is so rare. It's hard to find somebody who has a story. I felt terrible for all these doctors. I felt mad and all those feelings too, but I also felt bad because it seemed impossible for them to diagnose too. So, yeah, I just wanted to share my story, not to take up too much more of the show here, but just to show you how difficult it can be. And I'd be curious if anybody else had any kind of stories like this because fortunately, my wife's still alive and well. She has a bit of memory problems here and there. Like there's no real long-term effects. But yeah, like I don't know how hearing people's stories about meningitis and how quickly it could take somebody. I'm very grateful she's still here. Also very grateful for that nurse in St. Boniface. But also curious, like if that happened to somebody, like how do you get it diagnosed properly? Because I've seen that process.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, first, Travis, thanks for sharing that.
Was that too much?
No, that was, I think that's a story I think a lot of us need to hear because we see numbers. We hear meningitis is a thing, but like you said, we don't hear the stories behind it.
Like it'll show up in fever and it'll show up in, I honestly think because it was summer, somewhere in those diagnoses, like there was about 8 or 9 different ones. I think one of them was West Nile virus. Wow. Like they were just so meningitis is so rare that they will not. It's tough to diagnose.
Well, yeah, I'm curious with you, Dr. Labus. Do you know in terms of diagnosis how difficult that is on your end of things?
Well, in the one sense, it's easy to diagnose. Now, here's the thing: there are many different types of meningitis because meningitis just means again an infection, right? So you can be infected with a bacteria, you can be infected with a virus. And the viral forms of meningitis tend to be less severe, but harder to diagnose. The bacteria forms of meningitis are more severe, but they're more evident. Honestly, the minute you take a blood sample and you see bacteria in the blood, you're like, okay, this person has an infection. They have neurological symptoms. It's obviously spread to the brain. So that makes it very, very straightforward. The problem with viral meningitis, even though it tends not to be as acute, number one, antibiotics are not going to fix it because it's a virus, not a bacteria. But it also means that you won't necessarily have a positive culture. So the way you see if somebody has bacteria in their blood or their urine or their sputum or the fluid in their spinal cord is you actually have to get a sample of that fluid, be it blood or spinal fluid or what have you, and then culture it, let it grow to see if bacteria grow in there. But of course, if there's no bacteria in your system, if it's a virus that's causing all of this, sometimes those cultures come back negative. And this is part of the problem. Sometimes an initial negative test result will skew the investigations one way. So if at the first time you say, oh, could this be meningitis? You test, you don't see bacteria, and you're like, okay, well, it's probably not that. Somebody has to clue in and say, could this be a viral meningitis? And then you have to sort of look for other suggestions that it might be that. And this is, again, a problem is that when you have a false diagnosis, it can follow you through the system, and it sometimes takes somebody to take a step back and say, wait, let's throw everything out, let's start again. Could this, in fact, be a viral meningitis? And then if you know what you're looking for, it's pretty straightforward, but you have to think of it before you can test for it.
Well, thanks again, Travis. Really appreciate your input there. And we are still open to taking your calls, 204-780-0893. So we've talked about the disease itself, the symptoms, the diagnosis, but I actually want to talk about prevention and the vaccine. So can you explain who needs the vaccine and when?
So the short answer to your question is everyone. Now, routinely, the way the routine vaccine schedule works, and this is going to vary a bit province to province, but usually the first dose of the vaccine is given at around 1 year of age. It is actually approved starting at 2 months of age, but the routine schedule in where you guys are is at 1 year of age, with then a second dose given in elementary school, usually around grade 6 or so. And then there is some debate about once you start getting into adulthood, are there certain high-risk groups that need it again? Service people who serve in the military, people who are in other high-risk occupations sometimes get it. But the point is, everybody should get it routinely. And if you haven't got it, if your child did not get it for whatever reason, they can get it now. And there is a schedule for what's called catch-up vaccination. So this is all on the Government of Manitoba website. You can go and you can look it up. And you can see, and the easiest way, of course, is to just make an appointment at the vaccination center and tell them, hi, my child is this years old. They haven't gotten vaccinated. Are they eligible? The answer will invariably probably be yes. And also now, because the government of Manitoba is sort of updating the vaccine to use the one that is more broad spectrum, that protects against more different serotypes of meningitis, even somebody who's been vaccinated before can, in theory, get an updated vaccine now to give them a broader degree of protection. But the easiest way to navigate what is admittedly a very complicated flow diagram of when to get vaccinated when is to, call the vaccination centers, make an appointment and see if you're eligible. But the routine schedule is 1 dose as an infant, 1 dose when you're in elementary school. And the timing of that, unfortunately does vary a bit province to province, which is why it's so complicated in Canada, because you look from one province to the next and you say, hey, why are they done at different ages? And it's because every province administers their vaccine program a little bit differently.
I've got a baby due in about 2 months or so, and I know babies get fevers. They're not very good at communicating. What symptoms, as a parent, should I be looking out for? Particularly in a young, vulnerable person for something as scary as meningococcal disease.
So it's very, very difficult. And the joke is that when you do your pediatrics rotation as a student and a trainee, you will do more lumbar punctures than you will ever do in the adult population for exactly that reason. You can't rely on the children to give you a good history. They just cry because they're not doing well. So you're like, well, could this be meningitis? We don't know. We have to go test the spinal fluid. And so you see a lot of lumbar punctures being done in pediatrics for exactly that reason. It can be very tough. I think the one rule of thumb is that if you see a very, very high fever, that's obviously not a good sign. If things are getting worse, not better, that's not a good sign. And if your child is not able to eat or drink or stay hydrated and is not thriving, that's a bad sign too. But it is very, very subjective. And, I have great sympathy for parents of young children because it's not obvious and you don't know. And sometimes you do have to go to the emergency room because you also don't have the experience, especially if it's your first child. Like, you don't know what normal looks like. And so as frustrating and unpleasant as it is to sit in an emergency room only to get sent home and be told that, your child's fine, sometimes that's what you have to do because it is better to present early than it is to present late. And as much as people might grumble about people showing up to the emergency room for just viral illnesses or something that's not very important, when people die of meningitis, it's often because care was started too late and they weren't able to get access to antibiotics quick enough. So you do have to walk that fine line. And I will say I remember an experience when I was a trainee. One of the rules of thumb was when, first-time parents will often bring their kids in for everything because they have no experience. But when somebody who has 3 or 4 kids brings their child into the emergency room, take them seriously because they know what a routine illness looks like and what a serious illness looks like. And when they bring their kids in, those kids are usually very, very sick.
Well, Dr. Labos, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
My pleasure. You take care.
Dr. Christopher Labos is an epidemiologist and cardiologist based in Montreal. Well, 12:57 right now, and we are at the tail end of Radio Noon, but coming up from 3 to 6 is Up to Speed this afternoon, and host Faith Wendal is in to tell us what we can look out for. Hello there.
Hello, Corey Funk. As folks will know, there was a pretty historic election yesterday, a by-election, the NDP's Carla Compton winning Tuxedo, which essentially wrestling a long-time stronghold away from the progressive Conservatives. We will have Chris Adams on the show to talk more about why it's a big deal and what this might mean for the landscape of politics here in Manitoba. So stay tuned for that conversation and a whole bunch of other things like traffic and weather this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Faith.
Thank you.
That is Faith Wendal. You can check them out on Up to Speed from 3 to 6 this afternoon. Well, that is a wrap for Radio Noon. Big thank you to Travis Peterson, not only for making us so good on YouTube, but for sharing your harrowing story with us this afternoon. And we're very happy that everything turned out for you and your wife and your kids. So thank you for sharing that story. Our technical producer this afternoon, May McKillop, director and producer Wendy Parker. Our show producer is Nelly Gonzalez, and our senior producer of audio is Leif Larson. And I am Corey Funk, sitting in the host chair today for Janet Stewart. You're listening to CBC Radio 1, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. Enjoy your last day of spring. First day of summer is tomorrow. It looks like it's going to be a lovely one. Coming up next, Riders and Company. Have a good one.